Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to treat the human body like the ultimate complex machine. Because honestly, just like any high-performance vehicle, your body really needs two fundamental things to operate. First, it needs high-octane gasoline to run the engine. And second, it needs high-quality structural materials to constantly build and repair the chassis. Well, in the world of human nutrition, we call those carbohydrates and proteins.
But before we get totally bogged down in the heavy biochemistry of how all this works, we have to ask ourselves a pretty practical question. What actually happens on a microscopic level when we take a bite of food? I mean, we all know eating makes us feel energized and helps us grow. But how does a piece of bread or a piece of chicken actually transform into human tissue and boundless energy? Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by meeting our macronutrients. Then we'll look at carbohydrates as our fuel and proteins as our building blocks. After that, we'll track out digestion breaks them down, explore the amazing blueprint of protein synthesis, and finally, look at how to strike the right balance in your everyday diet.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Meet Your Macronutrients, the major players on your plate.
It's really cool how our food basically divides into two distinct roles. On one side, you've got carbohydrates. Think of these as the fuel that powers the engine. They are your body's primary, absolutely essential source of energy, fueling your brain, your muscles, and building up those glycogen reserves. On the flip side, we have proteins. This is your framework. Proteins are the structural compounds responsible for growth and maintenance. They literally build the chassis of your body, creating everything from the enzymes that spark chemical reactions right down to the hormones that regulate your entire system.
Moving on to Section 2, Carbohydrates, the ultimate fuel.
Now here's the kicker. Not all fuel is created equal. Carbohydrates are classified by their chemical structure. You've got simple carbohydrates, right? Things like monosaccharides, such as glucose and fructose, or disaccharides like sucrose and lactose. These basically give your body incredibly quick access to energy. Then, your complex carbohydrates, or polysaccharides. These include starches, glycogen, and crucially, fiber. Now, fiber is super unique because the bonds between its monosaccharides actually can't be broken by human enzymes, so it provides little to no direct energy, but it gives us essential bulk that lowers blood cholesterol, regulates glucose absorption, and is absolutely vital for bowel movements and weight management. Since carbs act as our fuel, how quickly they burn matters immensely. And that brings us to the glycemic index. This is basically a classification of food based entirely on its potential to spike your blood glucose levels and trigger an insulin response. Understanding this index shows you exactly why eating foods with a low glycemic index is a real game changer. A low glycemic response means a slower, much steadier release of fuel into your bloodstream. This helps prolong physical endurance, improves your body's sensitivity to insulin, and keeps you feeling full for way longer, which is a massive benefit for sustained energy.
All right, Section 3, Proteins, the building blocks of our framework.
Just like carbs, proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But here is the major difference. Proteins contain nitrogen. Notice how every single amino acid shares the exact same core structure. You've got a central carbon atom attached to a hydrogen atom, an amino group, and an acid group. But if you look closely at that structure, there's a unique side group. It's that specific side group that differentiates one building block from another. It dictates the amino acid's shape, its size, its electrical charge, basically allowing them to link end to end to form the thousands of different proteins your body actually needs.
So there are 20 distinct amino acids that make up the proteins in your body. But what's truly fascinating is that we are completely dependent on our diet to provide 9 of these structural materials. We call these the essential amino acids, like leucine and valine, simply because the human body cannot manufacture them on its own. The remaining 11? Those are called non-essential amino acids, meaning as long as your body has nitrogen and the basic building blocks, it can just synthesize them internally. Which leads us nicely into Section 4, Digestion. Now that we know what the fuel and the framework are made of chemically, let's explore how the body actually extracts them.
The process of digestion systematically dismantles these complex, tangled chains of carbohydrates. It's kind of like a highly organized demolition site, and it starts right in your mouth, where an enzyme called salivary amylase kicks off the process of hydrolysis. As the food hits the stomach acids temporarily deactivate these digestive enzymes. But the real magic? That happens in the small intestine, where pancreatic amylase goes to work, breaking down large polysaccharides into incredibly short chains, and eventually single monosaccharides. This is pure glucose that can pass through the intestinal walls directly into the bloodstream as pure fuel. Finally, whatever is left over, those indigestible fibers we talked about, moves to the large intestine for fermentation.
Proteins, on the other hand, require a much more aggressive approach. In the mouth, they're really just crushed and moistened, but when they hit the stomach, they undergo an intense acid bath. Hydrochloric acid forcefully uncoils and denatures the complex, tangled shapes of the proteins, basically stripping away their structural stability so that digestive enzymes can access the peptide bonds. An enzyme called pepsin begins cleaving the large polypeptides into smaller ones. Then, much like carbohydrates, it's in the small intestine where pancreatic and intestinal proteases finally split those chains into single, absorbable amino acids.
Okay, section 5, the blueprint of protein synthesis. So your body has broken down the food and absorbed these single amino acids into the liver. But how does it rebuild them into its own custom proteins?
Well, this 6-step manufacturing cascade is absolutely incredible. The food you just ate really only provided the raw materials, the lumber and bricks, if you will. It's your DNA that acts as the master architect here. Your DNA serves as a template to make messenger RNA. This mRNA leaves the nucleus and attaches to ribosomes, which are essentially your protein-making machinery. Meanwhile, transfer RNA collects the raw amino acids from the cell fluids, brings them over to the mRNA, and the mRNA dictates the exact sequence they have to line up in. They bond one after another, and eventually a perfectly constructed, complete human protein is released.
Now, most of the time, this highly complex manufacturing cascade works flawlessly. But what happens when there's a microscopic glitch in that architectural blueprint?
Sickle cell anemia is a prime example of the physical consequence of a genetic error. It's a hereditary form of anemia. Normally, hemoglobin is this massive globular protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen around. But in sickle cell anemia, just one single amino acid out of sequence changes the whole shebang. The amino acid valine takes the position normally occupied by glutamic acid in two of the protein's chains. This tiny, microscopic error completely alters the shape of the entire protein, physically deforming the red blood cell into a crescent or sickle shape, making it unable to carry oxygen efficiently. It really makes the underlying chemistry feel immediate and incredibly real, doesn't it?
Finally, Section 6, striking the right balance. Let's zoom back out from the microscopic level of DNA and amino acids and look practically at your daily diet. To maintain internal homeostasis and keep both the engine running and the chassis strong, health guidelines have established some targets. Your daily energy intake should heavily prioritize carbohydrates for fuel. We're talking roughly 45 to 65% of your total daily calories. Meanwhile, you need to keep a steady, moderate intake of protein to maintain your framework, and that should account for about 10 to 35% of your daily intake.
While balancing these macros broadly, we also need to keep a few specific limits in mind. For your fuel, ensure you limit added sugars to less than 10% of your total energy intake to mitigate risks like obesity and heart disease. Make sure you're prioritizing those complex carbs by getting 14 grams of fiber for every 1,000 calories you consume. And for your framework, the recommended dietary allowance for protein in adults is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And hey, if you're utilizing plant-based proteins, just remember to use complementary proteins so you make sure you're gathering all 9 of those essential amino acids.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a completely new way to look at your food. The next time you sit down to eat, don't just see a plate of food. Look closely at what you're about to consume and ask yourself, is this going to fuel the engine or rebuild the chassis? How perfectly are you balancing the high-octane energy of carbohydrates with the essential